When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. They say every journey begins with a choice, some made out of hope, some out of fear, and others out of blind curiosity. Mine began on a humid night in Bangkok, with the neon lights of the city flickering like restless spirits in the rain-slick streets. I was just another tourist then, a man with a camera slung over my shoulder, and a wife beside me who believed that luck could be bought if one only knew where to look. My name is Daniel. Back then, I was 36 years old, a marketing consultant from Portland, Oregon. My wife, Claire, worked as a freelance illustrator. We weren't the kind of people who believed in curses or blessings. Our lives were measured by deadlines, bills, and the next chance to escape the monotony. Yet beneath her bright smile, Claire carried a quiet desperation. Her art wasn't selling, my contracts were slowing down, and the idea of good fortune felt like a lifeline we were both too stubborn to admit we needed. Thailand promised temples, lanterns swaying in warm night winds, and mysteries wrapped in incense smoke. But no guidebook had warned me that the things you bring home from a foreign land may not always be souvenirs. Some of them breathe. Some of them wait. I tell this story now not to entertain, but because silence has become unbearable. At night, when the house is still and the air thickens with the weight of memory, I hear it again. The soft, broken sob of a child who does not exist. I've scrubbed the walls 100 times, but the faint prints of tiny hands still bloom beneath the paint, like bruises that refuse to fade. This is not a ghost story in the way you expect. It is a confession, a thread I must unravel before it strangles me whole. And if you choose to listen, I must warn you. Some things once heard cling to you. They do not let go. I never thought I would be the kind of man to look back on his own life and wonder at which precise moment the ground beneath him cracked. Was it the first step onto foreign soil? The first word exchanged with a stranger? Or was it that night in Bangkok when I let Claire linger too long at the edge of a market stall glowing with candles and shadows? Back then, everything felt ordinary enough. Claire and I had landed in Thailand with a tourist hunger, temples to photograph, food stalls to try, fabrics and spices to carry home as proof that we had lived a little outside our own predictable lives. We had booked a small hotel near the Chao Phraya River, the kind that smelled faintly of jasmine and mildew, with ceiling fans that turned as slowly as dreams. From the balcony, I could see the temple roofs, their edges curled like flames against the skyline. At night, the air carried both the perfume of frangipani and the sour tang of smoke from street vendors' grills. Claire was enchanted from the very start. She was the kind of woman who collected stories like charms, tucking them into her sketchbooks with the same reverence others gave to prayers. Her hair was pinned back with a jade clasp she'd bought at the airport, and in her eyes I saw the same hunger that had first drawn me to her. Restless, searching, never content with the surface of things. For me, Thailand was supposed to be a distraction. Work had thinned back home, my phone buzzed less with new projects, and the silence in my inbox was beginning to echo louder than any midnight whisper. I thought maybe the distance, the strangeness of another country, might loosen the knots of worry strangling my chest. On our second night, we took a tuk-tuk to a night market said to stretch endlessly through the alleys like a living labyrinth. Lanterns bobbed in the warm breeze, their lights staining the crowd in shades of red and gold. Vendors called out in voices hoarse from smoke and bargaining, the air thick with grilled meats, fried dough, and incense that clung to your skin like invisible hands. It was there, among the clamor and color, that we first saw her. The woman was seated behind a stall half hidden in shadow. Unlike the other vendors, she did not shout, did not beckon. A single oil lamp flickered on her table, illuminating rows of small wooden figures, each with painted eyes that seemed far too wet, far too alive. Claire stopped so abruptly I nearly ran into her. "They're beautiful," she whispered, leaning closer. I felt the opposite. The dolls unsettled me in a way I couldn't articulate. Their faces were childlike but hollow, their cheeks painted with a blush that made them seem fevered, almost sickly. Some were dressed in silk scraps, others adorned with tiny gold trinkets, and all of them, every last one, seemed to stare back. The vendor finally looked up at us. Her eyes caught the lamplight, and her smile was as thin as a blade. She said something in Thai, her voice low, and for a moment I thought I heard a baby's cry carried faintly on the night air. But when I turned my head, it was gone, swallowed by the noise of the market. Claire asked, "What are these?" The woman studied her for a long moment before answering in halting English. "Kumanthong," she said, shaping the syllables carefully. "Golden boy, child spirit, bring luck if you care for him." I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to pull Claire's hand and steer her towards safer curiosities. Silk scarves, brass elephants, painted umbrellas. But Claire was transfixed. "How do you care for them?" she asked. The woman's smile widened. She reached beneath the table and lifted a doll wrapped in red cloth. Unlike the others, this one had glass eyes that glimmered with eerie clarity. The painted lips curved in something too close to a smirk. "You feed," the woman said simply. "Milk. Sweet things. Treat like child. He will love you. He will give back fortune." "And if you don't?" I asked, surprising myself with the sharpness of my tone. The woman's smile faltered. For a heartbeat, her face was carved stone. "If you don't," she said, "he cry. He hungry. He angry." Claire touched the doll's small hand, and I swear I saw the shadow of her fingers linger on its painted skin longer than it should have. I told myself it was nonsense, a tourist trap, a superstition sold to foreigners too naive to know better. Yet as the vendor wrapped the doll in cloth and slipped it into a paper bag, I felt a weight settle in my chest, heavy as wet sand. That night, as we rode back to the hotel with the bag between us, Claire cradled it on her lap as though it were fragile, precious. She smiled in the neon-lit blur of the city, and I felt something cold creep beneath my skin. "Daniel," she whispered as though speaking to herself, "I think this will change everything." I wish more than anything I had believed her, because it did. The second time we returned to the night market, I told myself it was only for the food. Pad thai sizzling on a flat pan, mangoes carved with the precision of calligraphy, skewers of meat glazed with honey. These were safe, tangible things. But Claire knew better. I saw it in her eyes as we wove through the alleys. She wasn't looking at the food, or the trinkets, or even the shimmering fabrics that snapped in the humid wind. She was looking for her, the vendor, that woman with her shadowed stall and the flickering oil lamp. I tried to distract Claire, guiding her towards stalls where men carved soap into delicate flowers, or where teenagers sold bracelets strung with beads that clattered like falling rain. But Claire slipped away from my side, drawn as if by a thread I couldn't see. By the time I caught up, she was already standing in front of the stall again. The woman hadn't moved. It was as though she'd been waiting. The same oil lamp burned steadily, casting her face in trembling light. The dolls lined the table in neat rows, their painted eyes watching silently. My skin prickled. Claire spoke first. "I can't stop thinking about him." "Him?" I asked, though I knew. She gestured to the wrapped figure she'd purchased the night before. It lay safely in our hotel room, still bundled in its red cloth. But she spoke of it as though it were alive, a child sleeping under our roof. The vendor's thin smile returned. She nodded as though pleased. Then, in a voice low and measured, she began to explain more. "Kumanthong is spirit child," she said. "Not toy, not decoration, You must respect. You must feed. You must listen. He is alive." Her English faltered, but her meaning struck deep. I wanted to protest, to tell Claire this was madness. But the vendor leaned closer, her voice falling to a whisper that threaded through the noise of the market. "If you love him, he protect you. Money, safety, health, all come. But," she paused. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp as glass. "If you forget him, he remind you." The way she said it, "remind you," sent a chill sliding down my back. Claire nodded eagerly, like a student receiving secret knowledge. "What does he want in return?" she asked. The vendor tilted her head, as though the question were foolish. "Love. Always love. Same as a child." I remember laughing under my breath then, though the sound was hollow. "It's a doll," I muttered. The vendor looked at me with something colder than disapproval. Her eyes were flat, dark, like the surface of a pond at midnight. "Not doll," she said. "Child." For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the sensation of being followed, not by a person, but by an idea, a weight that clung to us as we moved. We tried to enjoy ourselves. Claire bought a lantern painted with lotus blossoms, and I carried it awkwardly through the crowd. We stopped to eat satay dipped in peanut sauce so rich it lingered on my tongue for hours. Yet every time I glanced at Claire, her expression betrayed her. She wasn't thinking about the food or the trinkets. She was thinking about the bundle in our hotel room, waiting. When we returned that night, she unwrapped it with a tenderness that made my stomach turn. The doll emerged from its red cloth, its painted cheeks flushed, its glass eyes gleaming in the lamplight. Claire stroked its tiny carved hand, as though it might curl its fingers around hers. "You should name him," she said to me. I scoffed. "It's wooden paint, Claire. It doesn't need a name." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't talk like that. It's bad luck." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped. There was something in her tone, in the fervor lighting her face, that silenced me. It was the same look she had when she poured herself into her drawings, convinced that through sheer will she could pull a new world into existence. That night I dreamed again. The sound of the market faded into the echo of small feet pattering across the floorboards of our hotel room. I couldn't see the child, but I could feel him, hovering just beyond the veil of sleep, breathing softly in the dark. When I woke, Claire was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the doll in her lap. The curtains fluttered in the weak dawn breeze, and on the wall beside her, faint smudges appeared. Marks like fingers, too small to belong to either of us. I said nothing. What was there to say? The next day we visited a temple. Claire wanted to sketch the golden spires, the way they pierced the sky like frozen flames. Inside, incense curled upward in slow, aching spirals. I lingered near a monk who sat quietly by the altar, his head bowed, his robes glowing like embers in the dim light. On impulse, I asked him. I pointed to the small bag Claire carried, where the doll was wrapped again, and asked, "Do you know Kumanthong?" The monk's head lifted slowly. His eyes, when they met mine, were impossibly tired. He nodded once. "Do not mistake him for a toy," he said softly, his English clear but heavy with accent. "He is spirit, a child, bound. He wants devotion. He wants to be remembered. And if you forget, he will remind you." The same words, the same warning. I carried those words with me as we left the temple, the sun blinding, the heat pressing against us like a living thing. Claire, however, seemed unaffected. She hummed quietly, her hands tightening on the bag, as though she had already accepted the responsibility. That night the crying began. It was faint at first, a sound I thought might be a stray cat in the alley. But as I lay there in the dark, the sound shifted, softened, grew unbearably human. It was the cry of a newborn, thin, broken, reaching. I turned on my side. Claire's eyes were open, glittering in the dim light. "You hear it too," she whispered. I swallowed, my throat dry. I didn't answer, because I knew if I admitted it aloud, it would no longer be a dream. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, jet lag, the humidity, the endless shuffle of bodies through the night market, all of it colliding to play tricks on my ears. But when dawn came and I peeled myself out of the sheets, the truth had already stained the walls. Tiny handprints, not painted, not scrawled, but pressed into the pale plaster like a memory etched in dust. Some were faint, others smeared, as though a child had been playing, sliding palms along the wall. The size was wrong for Claire's hands, and certainly for mine. I stared until my eyes blurred, half expecting the prints to fade in daylight. They did not. Claire didn't look surprised when she saw them. Instead, she traced her fingers along one faint mark, as though it were delicate art. "He's here," she whispered. I didn't ask who she meant. The answer trembled in the air between us. That afternoon, I dragged her back to the temple. I needed clarity, an anchor to steady me against this tide of unease. The same monk was there, kneeling before an altar that shimmered with candlelight. Incense smoke curled like pale ribbons into the beams above, filling the chamber with a sweet, choking heaviness. I bowed clumsily, unsure of the etiquette, and waited until he lifted his head. "You bought it," he said simply, his English deliberate, the consonants heavy in his throat. I stiffened. "How did you—" He gestured vaguely toward Claire, who was clutching the wrapped doll close, like a mother shielding an infant. The monk's eyes flickered with sorrow. "Kumanthong," he murmured. "Golden boy, spirit child, a soul bound in wood, trapped by ritual. Once, once they were made with terrible things, remnants of children, stillborn or lost. Now only the shape remains, but the hunger never leaves." My stomach turned. "So it's cursed?" The monk shook his head. "Not cursed, not blessed, simply bound. A bargain. You give him love, food, devotion. He gives you fortune. But if you forget, he cries. If you abandon, he reminds. Always." Claire stepped forward, her voice hushed but eager. "But it can bring us luck. Protection?" The monk's gaze lingered on her with a sadness that felt centuries old. "Luck given by the dead is not free. Every gift has a shadow. Every child has a cost." His words hung in the silence, heavy as temple bells. I wanted to grab Claire's arm, drag her out, toss the doll into the river, and be done with it. But I didn't. Something in her face held me back, an intensity I rarely saw outside her art. For months she had been drowning in doubt, her commissions drying up, her confidence slipping. And now here was something that promised hope, a lifeline shaped like a child's face carved in wood. We left the temple in silence. The sun outside felt harsher, the colors of Bangkok suddenly too bright, too sharp, as if the world itself recoiled from what we carried. That night I woke to the sound again, not faint this time, clear, piercing, the thin, broken wail of an infant. I sat up, heart hammering. Claire was already awake, the doll cradled in her arms. She rocked it gently, whispering soft words I couldn't make out. "Claire!" My voice cracked. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were glazed, her expression serene, as though she were somewhere far away. The crying ceased. Silence fell heavy, oppressive, as if the room itself held its breath. Then came a new sound. Tap, tap, tap. I turned toward the wall. In the dim light, I saw fresh prints appearing, fingers pressing into the plaster, one after another, as if a child's invisible hands were walking their way upward. My body locked in place, terror rooting me to the mattress. I wanted to scream, to drag Claire away, to run, but my voice deserted me. When dawn broke, the prints remained, scattered across the walls like some grotesque mural. We checked out of the hotel that morning, moving to another place nearer the river. I told myself a change of room would help, that maybe the old walls had carried stains from another family, another child. But deep down, I knew better. The doll came with us, Claire insisted on setting it on the bedside table in our new room. She placed a small cup of milk in front of it, along with a few sticky rice sweets she'd bought from a street vendor. "It's what they told me," she said. "Offerings." I stared at the absurd scene, my wife feeding a painted doll as though it were flesh and blood. "You're encouraging this," I muttered. Claire's eyes flashed. "You heard him too. You saw the prints. Don't pretend this isn't real, Daniel." I had no answer. That night the crying didn't come. The silence was almost worse. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, the occasional bark of a stray dog beyond the window. And just as sleep threatened to drag me under, I felt it. A weight, something small and cold pressing onto the edge of the bed, as though a child had climbed up and sat watching. I didn't move. I couldn't. The pressure lingered for long minutes, then lifted. And from the corner of my eye, I swore I saw the doll's head tilt, just slightly toward me. The following day, I returned alone to the temple. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The monk was sweeping the stone steps when he saw me. He didn't look surprised. "You still have him," he said. I nodded, throat tight. "What happens if we take him home? To America?" The monk's broom stilled. "Spirits know no borders. If you take him, he will go. If you keep him close, he will follow. His bond is not to this land, but to you." "And if we get rid of him?" I asked. The monk's eyes darkened. "If you cast him away without ritual, he will return. A child unloved does not forgive. Do not make him lonely." The words scraped across my chest, leaving something raw and bleeding behind. I left the temple with the certainty that we had stepped into something we could not easily leave. That night, Claire pressed against me in the dark, her whisper hot against my ear. "Daniel, I dreamed of him. He called me Mama." I didn't sleep after that, because dreams have a way of becoming doors. And once opened, they do not easily close. The first night we kept him close, I realized something had already changed between Claire and me. It was in the way she held the doll, careful and protective, as though it were fragile. It was in her voice, soft and coaxing, as though she were speaking to a child. She set him on the bedside table of our new hotel room, the lamplight catching the glass in his eyes so they seemed to gleam wetly in the shadows. I wanted to move him. I wanted to shove him back into the red cloth and the paper bag, to push him into the wardrobe or leave him in the lobby and walk away. But Claire's hands lingered on his wooden cheek, and something in her gaze made me hesitate. "He's calmer now," she whispered, as though she had known him long enough to tell. I said nothing. The hotel room was small, square, with peeling wallpaper patterned in faded lotuses. The window overlooked a narrow alley where neon lights flickered and mopes coughed through the night. A ceiling fan turned lazily, blades chopping the heat into sluggish currents. Claire arranged offerings again, a small cup of milk, 2 wrapped sweets from the market. She positioned them neatly before the doll, as though setting a table for a guest. "You don't really believe this, do you?" I asked finally. She didn't look at me. "It's not about belief, it's about respect." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. There was nothing funny in the way the doll seemed to watch us. His painted lips curled in a permanent half-smile, his head tilted ever so slightly to the side. That night the crying didn't come immediately. For hours there was only the hum of the fan, the muffled honking of cars, the sigh of wind through the narrow alley. Claire drifted into sleep, her body curved protectively toward the doll on the table. But sometime after midnight, the sound began. Thin, faint. A whimper at first, as though from a baby too tired to cry properly. My eyes snapped open. I lay rigid, listening. The cry wavered, rose, fell, then steadied into a rhythm, soft broken sobs threading through the dark. I turned my head toward the table. The doll sat unmoved, glass eyes gleaming. The cup of milk was half empty. My mouth dried. I hadn't heard Claire get up. The cup had been full when we lay down. The crying swelled. Not from the alley, not from the street below. From here, from inside the room. "Claire," I whispered, my hand brushing her shoulder. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. But she didn't look confused. She didn't look afraid. Instead, she smiled faintly. "You hear him too," she murmured, almost with relief. The crying stopped. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ceiling fan stutter, hear my own breath catching. Then came another sound, a shuffle, as though small feet dragged across the tiled floor, moving from one corner of the room to the next. I bolted upright. My eyes darted through the shadows. The space beneath the table was empty. The corners were bare. But the sound persisted, soft and deliberate, circling us like a predator biding its time. Claire sat up now, clutching the doll. "It's all right," she whispered, as if speaking to someone I could not see. "We're here. We'll take care of you." And just like that, the noise ceased. The next morning, sunlight streamed harshly through the thin curtains. Claire was still asleep. The doll clutched against her chest as though it had been born of her body. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, gripping the sink until my knuckles blanched. I wanted to believe it had been a dream, some fever of the mind. But when I stepped back into the room, I froze. On the wall above the bed, clear against the faded lotus wallpaper, were handprints. Dozens of them, small, smeared, reaching. Some trailed downward as if a child had slid along the wall. Others pressed high as though tiny arms had stretched upward toward the ceiling. The milk cup sat empty. Claire woke and followed my gaze. But instead of fear, there was wonder in her eyes. "He's stronger now," she said softly. I felt something inside me fracture. Later that day, we took a boat ride along the Chao Phraya. I tried to distract us with the sight of gilded temples flashing in the sun, monks gliding along the banks in orange robes, children splashing in the shallows. I tried to remind Claire and myself that we were here for adventure, not for ghosts. But even as she sketched the skyline in her notebook, I saw her hand tremble. And when she thought I wasn't looking, she flipped to another page. A child's face, round, pale, with eyes too large. She had drawn it again and again, each sketch more detailed, more alive. That night the crying returned earlier, stronger. It began before we even turned off the light, a high, thin wail that rose from nowhere and everywhere at once. Claire lit a stick of incense, placing it before the doll, and whispered a prayer she must have picked up at the temple. The crying softened, then broke into hiccuping sobs. I wanted to scream. Instead, I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound crawled beneath my skin, vibrating through my bones. And then, the bed shifted, the unmistakable weight of something small climbing onto the mattress. Tiny hands pressed briefly against my leg. I yanked the blanket back, heart thundering. Nothing. Only the hollow space between us. But Claire's face glowed with serenity. She cradled the doll, rocking gently, humming a lullaby I had never heard before. When she looked at me, her eyes were distant. "He's only lonely, Daniel. Can't you feel it? He just wants love." I couldn't answer, because in that moment I did feel it. A loneliness so deep, so endless, it seeped into me like ink spreading through water. And I knew with a clarity that hollowed me out that this was only the beginning. The human mind has a way of adjusting to strangeness. The first time you hear something that should not exist, you convince yourself it was a mistake. The second time, you call it coincidence. By the third, you begin to surrender to it. That was how it was with the crying. By now, it came every night, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp enough to split the silence wide open. There was no pattern, no mercy, just that thin wail, weaving itself into our sleep until I could not tell where dreams ended and reality began. Claire, though, Claire no longer flinched. She welcomed it. On the fifth night, it began even before we had settled into bed. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, muffled through the thin bathroom door. A child's whimper, soft but insistent. I froze, the toothbrush dangling from my lips. The sound was inside the room, not from the street, not from another guest. Inside. I opened the door slowly, Claire was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the doll upright in her lap. The lamp threw her shadow tall against the wall, a dark figure rocking back and forth. The crying swelled, bouncing off the peeling wallpaper. "Claire," I whispered, but she didn't turn. Instead, she stroked the doll's painted cheek, murmuring words too low for me to hear. The sound seemed to soothe him, because yes, by then I had begun to think of it as him. The crying softened into hiccuping sobs, then quieted. I stood there, toothbrush still in hand, staring at the absurdity, the horror of it all. And yet the weight of the silence after the crying was heavier than the sound itself. Later that night, the crying returned. I woke with a start, sweat plastering my shirt to my skin. The room was pitch dark, the fan groaning overhead. At first it was distant, a faint mewling, like a kitten trapped somewhere. But then it grew clearer, sharper, closer. A baby's cry right beside my ear. I bolted upright. Claire slept soundly beside me, her hand still resting on the doll's chest. The sound came again, louder. My eyes darted wildly, searching the room. And then I saw it. On the far wall, in the dim light bleeding through the curtains, fresh prints appeared, one after another, as though invisible hands pressed into the plaster. Small, wet, glistening. I stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet. "Stop this," I hissed into the emptiness. "Whatever you are, stop!" The crying halted. Silence crashed down, deafening. Then from the corner of the room came the sound of breathing, shallow, rapid, a child's breath. I pressed my back against the wall, every muscle locked. The sound moved, circling slowly, until it hovered just beside me. My skin prickled, goose flesh rising. I dared not move. And then a whisper. "Papa." The air left my lungs in a rush. When I turned, there was nothing, only the empty space, heavy with presence. Morning did not save me. The handprints remained, stark against the walls. Claire didn't look horrified. She looked proud. "He trusts us now," she said, as though this were proof of devotion. "Trust?" My voice cracked. "Claire, this isn't trust. It's infestation. This thing isn't ours. It doesn't belong to us." Her gaze hardened. "He belongs to us now. Don't you see? He chose us." I laughed bitterly. "You sound insane." She flinched as though I had struck her. And for the first time, I realized there was no reasoning with her anymore. She had crossed a line I hadn't even seen, and the boy, whatever he was pulling her deeper each night. That evening, I refused to stay in the room. I wandered the streets instead, trying to lose myself in the press of tourists, the glow of lanterns, the hum of mopeds rattling through the alleys. But everywhere I went, I thought I heard it. A faint whimper weaving through the crowd. A cry threading between the laughter of children playing near the river. I shook my head, clapped my hands to my ears, but the sound was inside me now. By the time I returned, Claire was waiting. The doll sat upright on the table, offerings neatly arranged before him. "You left us," she said coldly. "Us, not me and the doll. Just us." Something in my chest turned to stone. That night was the worst yet. The crying didn't stop. It rose and fell like a tide, swelling until the air itself seemed to vibrate. My temples throbbed, my ears rang, and still it went on, as though the boy were testing the limits of my sanity. At one point, Claire rose, cradled the doll, and began to pace the room. She rocked him, humming softly, her voice raw from exhaustion but steady. And as she moved, the crying followed her, not from her lips, not from her imagination, but from the space around her, a sound tethered to her like a shadow. I pressed the pillow over my head, desperate to shut it out. But the sound leaked through the cotton, through my skull, until I felt my own voice rising in a strangled sob. I wanted to tear the doll from her arms, smash it, burn it, anything to silence him. But when I sat up, Claire's eyes met mine, And in that dim, feverish light, I realized something. The crying wasn't coming from the doll at all. It was coming from her. Her lips didn't move, but the sound poured from her throat, from her chest, a ventriloquist for a spirit that had already made her its mother. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the corner, knees drawn up, watching as Claire rocked and hummed, the boy's sobs rattling the air until dawn. When the first light touched the curtains, she finally laid the doll back on the table, kissing its wooden forehead. The crying ceased instantly. She turned to me with hollow eyes and whispered, "He's ours now, Daniel. You can't deny him anymore." I had no answer, because in that moment, I wasn't sure if she was wrong. Morning should have brought relief. Sunlight is supposed to cleanse the corners, to banish the shapes that haunt the dark. But that morning, the light only revealed what the night had left behind. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the wall opposite the bed. It was covered. Not with cracks, not with stains, but with handprints. Hundreds of them. Tiny palms and fingers smeared across the faded wallpaper like a child had been playing in ash, and pressed his joy against every surface. Some marks were faint, like whispers. Others were stark, dark, fresh. They climbed upward toward the ceiling, trailed along the headboard, clustered near the door. It was as though an entire nursery of unseen children had been set loose in our room while we slept. I felt bile rise in my throat. "Claire!" My voice cracked. She stirred, sitting up slowly. When her eyes found the wall, she didn't gasp, didn't recoil. Instead, she smiled faintly. "He wanted to play," she said. I stared at her, words choking me. "You call this playing?" She slid out of bed barefoot and crossed the room. Her hand hovered just over one of the prints, not quite touching, as though afraid it might vanish if she did. "Look at the size," she whispered. "He's so small. Just a baby." "Claire!" I swallowed hard. "This isn't normal. This isn't—" She turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare call him it. He's a child. Our child. Our child." The words struck harder than any blow. For a moment I saw the life we'd never had. Nurseries left empty, arguments about timing, about money, about whether we were ready. And in that emptiness, Claire had found something to fill the void, something that should never have been filled. I couldn't stay in that room. I pulled on my clothes, shoved my camera into my bag, and stormed out into the blinding Bangkok sun. The streets were already alive, mopeds weaving between taxis, vendors shouting, children running barefoot along the sidewalks. The noise was overwhelming, a brutal contrast to the suffocating silence of our room. But even here I felt it. As I passed a vendor stacking oranges into pyramids, I caught the faintest sound, a whimper, like a baby calling for its mother. I spun, heart racing, but no one else reacted. At a small cafe, I ordered coffee strong enough to burn my tongue, hoping bitterness would drown the unease clawing at me. But as I raised the cup, I saw it, the print of a tiny hand, smeared across the glass as though some unseen child had touched it first. The cup slipped from my hand, shattering. The owner rushed over, frowning, but I barely heard her apologies. My pulse thundered, my vision blurred. I wasn't escaping him. He was following me. When I returned to the hotel, the maid was just leaving our room, her face pale, her steps hurried. She clutched her cleaning supplies like a shield. Inside, Claire sat calmly at the table, the doll propped upright before her. The handprints remained on the walls, untouched. "She wouldn't clean," Claire said simply, as if explaining a child's tantrum. She felt him too. She was afraid. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she woke from whatever spell had taken hold. But when I looked at her, I saw something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in months, maybe years, the worry lines around her eyes had softened. Her voice was gentle, steady. The despair that had weighed on her before our trip seemed to have lifted. "He's helping us," she said. "You'll see." That night I resolved to stay awake. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the doll. The air was thick, unmoving. The city's noise ebbed slowly as midnight came, leaving only the hum of the fan and the occasional bark of a stray dog. At first nothing happened. The doll sat motionless, offerings laid neatly before him. Claire slept soundly, her breaths deep and even. Then, the first cry. It came sharp and sudden, like a blade through silence. My body jolted. The doll hadn't moved, but the air around him seemed to ripple. Another cry, higher, urgent, and then the prints began, not fading from yesterday, but new ones, blossoming across the wall like ink spreading on paper. Palm after palm, finger after finger, pressing into the plaster. I watched them appear in real time, my breath trapped in my throat. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs refused to obey. The crying grew louder, echoing through the room, until I could swear there was a child just out of sight, pacing the walls, dragging his hands along them. "Papa," a whisper came. My heart stopped. "Papa." I clamped my hands over my ears, shaking my head. "No," I muttered. "No, no, no." But the sound was inside me now, vibrating through my bones. When I finally dared to look, the wall opposite me was drenched in prints, layered on top of one another, as though hundreds of tiny hands were reaching out from the other side, desperate to come through. By dawn, the crying ceased. The prints remained. Claire rose, kissed the doll's forehead, and whispered, "Thank you." I watched her, hollow, broken, because whatever this thing was, it wasn't leaving. And worse, I realized neither was she. There's a point at which superstition ceases to be a curiosity and becomes a ritual. And once you cross that point, you don't get to turn back. That morning I woke to find Claire crouched in front of the doll, as though kneeling before an altar. The room smelled faintly of milk, sweet and sour in the damp heat. She held a small cup in her hands, tilting it carefully against the doll's painted lips. "Drink," she whispered. "You must be hungry." My throat tightened. "Claire, what are you doing?" She didn't look at me. "Feeding him." I sat up, the sheets tangling around my legs. "It's wood, Claire. Wood and paint. It doesn't eat." Her head snapped toward me, eyes blazing with a strange intensity I had never seen in her. "Don't talk like that," she hissed. "You'll upset him." The conviction in her voice stunned me into silence. I watched, powerless, as she set the cup before the doll, then placed 2 sticky rice sweets beside it. She folded her hands in her lap, bowed her head, and whispered something in Thai, words she must have picked up from the monk, or maybe the vendor. The doll sat motionless, yet the air in the room seemed to shift, thickening, pressing against my lungs. By midday, the milk was gone. I could swear I hadn't seen her drink it, hadn't seen her pour it out. But the cup was empty, the inside faintly streaked as though something had lapped it clean. I told myself she must have done it while I wasn't looking, but the thought didn't settle. It gnawed at me all day, whispering each time I caught sight of the doll's gleaming eyes. The rituals grew quickly. Every morning, Claire refreshed the offerings. A small bowl of milk, sweets wrapped in banana leaves, sometimes fruit she sliced carefully into tiny pieces. Every evening, she bowed her head, lit a stick of incense stolen from the temple, and whispered prayers as though she were tucking a child into bed. I argued at first. I shouted. I begged her to stop, but she only looked at me with pity, as though I were the one lost in delusion. "You don't understand," she said one night, her voice firm. "He's given us everything already. Haven't you noticed?" I wanted to scoff, but she pressed on. "Remember how the ATM wouldn't work yesterday? And then suddenly, when we tried again, it spat out double the amount? That was a glitch," I snapped. She shook her head. "It was him. He's protecting us. He's showing us he's real." Her conviction left me cold. That night I dreamed again. A child stood at the end of our bed, naked, skin pale, eyes too large for his face. He whispered, "Papa, I'm hungry." I woke with a start, sweat drenching me. The cup of milk was empty, Again. On the seventh day, something shifted. We had planned to take a day trip outside the city, to Ayutthaya, to see the ancient ruins. Claire packed her sketchbook, her eyes alight with excitement. For a moment, she looked like herself again, the woman I had married, bright, eager, alive. But when we reached the door, she froze. "The offerings," she whispered. "They'll be fine," I said quickly. "We'll be gone only a few hours." Her hand tightened on the doll, knuckles white. "No, we can't leave him without food. What if he cries?" Something in her voice unsettled me. The trembling fear, the fierce protectiveness. "Claire, please." But she was already unpacking, her face set in determination. We stay. And so we stayed. Our day trip abandoned, our world shrinking to the confines of that single suffocating room. That evening, as if in reward, the crying came softer, almost content. I sat rigid in the chair, watching as Claire rocked the doll in her arms, humming under her breath. And then, I heard it, not just crying. Laughter, a child's giggle, high and fleeting, like bells in the dark. I gripped the armrest until my fingers ached. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Claire's face lit with joy. "He's happy." By the 10th day, the room no longer felt like ours. It felt like his. Handprints stained every wall, layered upon each other until the wallpaper seemed alive with grasping palms. The air carried a constant undertone of milk soured by the heat. And Claire was no longer just Claire. She spoke to him as though he answered, paused mid-sentence as if listening, smiled at empty corners. At night when the crying began, she would hush him, rock him, feed him. And sometimes I swear I saw movement, a flicker of shadow too small, too fast, darting just out of sight. I stopped sleeping. My eyes burned, my body ached, but I couldn't let myself drift. Because each time I did, I dreamed of him. Always the same whisper. "Papa, I'm hungry." The final straw came one morning. I woke to find Claire sitting cross-legged on the floor, the doll propped against her knees. She was spooning rice into his painted mouth, careful, precise. When I grabbed the spoon from her hand, she looked at me with something close to hatred. "Don't you see?" she cried. "He's alive. He's ours. Why can't you love him too?" My voice broke. "Because he's not real." The words echoed, ugly in the stale air. And then, as if in reply, the wall shuddered. Dozens of fresh handprints bloomed all at once, spreading across the plaster like ink and water. The air filled with a sudden wail, louder than ever before, rattling the glass in the windows. Claire covered the doll with her arms, rocking furiously, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. Mama's here." The wailing grew, piercing, until my ears rang, until I dropped to my knees. And then, silence. The prince remained. The milk was gone. Claire looked up at me, her face wet with tears, but she was smiling. "He forgives us," she whispered. Sleep stopped being rest. It became another kind of haunting. I had resisted for nights, fighting to keep my eyes open until they burned, clinging to consciousness with coffee and desperation. But exhaustion is cruel. It always wins. And when it did, he came. The first dream was soft, almost tender. I was standing in our hotel room, though it looked different, cleaner, brighter, as though the prints on the walls had never existed. The curtains fluttered with a breeze that carried the scent of jasmine. For a moment I thought I was safe. Then I heard it, the sound of small feet padding across the tiles. I turned and he was there, a boy, no more than 3, naked but for a strip of cloth tied around his waist. His skin was pale, almost translucent, veins faintly visible beneath the surface. His hair stuck to his damp forehead, and his eyes, God, his eyes were far too large, black pools that seemed to drink the light. He looked at me, head tilted, lips parting. "Papa," he whispered. The word hit me like a stone. Before I could speak, he raised his arms, palms outstretched, as though asking to be carried. His fingers were smudged with gray, the same shade as the prints that covered our walls. When I hesitated, his lips trembled. His eyes filled with tears that spilled silently down his cheeks. "I'm cold," he said. "Papa, I'm hungry." I woke with a gasp, lungs burning. The room was dark, the fan creaking overhead. Claire slept soundly beside me, the doll nestled against her chest. I sat there, heart pounding, staring into the corners of the room. For a moment I swore I saw movement, a small shadow retreating, vanishing beneath the table. When I stumbled toward the offering bowl, I found it empty, the milk gone, the sweets half-eaten, crumbs scattered like proof. The next night the dream returned. This time the boy was closer, standing at the foot of our bed, his eyes wide, his chest heaving as though he'd been running. "Papa," he whispered again, "don't leave me." I tried to speak, but my voice refused to come. He climbed onto the bed, tiny knees pressing indentations into the mattress. I felt the weight, real, solid, crushing me with the reality of it. He crawled toward me, tears streaking his face, his cold hands reaching for my chest. When his fingers touched my skin, I woke with a scream. Claire bolted upright, clutching the doll. "What is it?" she cried. I stared at her, gasping. He touched me." Her expression softened into something dangerously close to joy. "Then he trusts you too." The dreams grew stronger. Every night he came. Sometimes he stood in the corner, watching. Sometimes he whispered secrets I couldn't remember upon waking. Once I saw him crouch by the wall, pressing his tiny palms against it, leaving fresh prints that bled into waking life. I began to dread sleep, but the more I fought it, the more viciously fatigue pulled me under. And each time I closed my eyes, his voice was there. "Papa, Papa, don't leave. Papa, I'm hungry." One night I dreamed of the temple. The golden spires loomed above me, candles flickering, incense thick in the air. The monk stood before me, his face grave. "You welcomed him," he said. "Now you must bear him." The boy stood at his side, clutching his robe. His eyes met mine, wide and pleading. "I'm yours now, Papa," he whispered. I woke with tears streaming down my face, though I hadn't realized I'd been crying. Claire stirred beside me, brushing my hair back gently. "He came to you, didn't he?" she asked. I couldn't answer. Her smile was faint, serene. "That means he's real for you, too." Days blurred. We no longer explored the city. We no longer visited temples or markets. Our world had shrunk to the four walls of the room, to the rituals of feeding, to the waiting for nightfall. I stopped checking my emails. I stopped caring about work, about deadlines. What use was the world outside, when every corner of this one was haunted by the boy's presence? Sometimes during the day I thought I heard him, a giggle from beneath the bed, the shuffle of feet behind the bathroom door. Once, while I showered, steam clouding the mirror, I wiped it clear and found a tiny handprint smeared across the glass. He was no longer confined to dreams. He was slipping through. The worst came on the 12th night. In the dream, I stood in darkness. The boy appeared slowly, stepping out of shadow, his eyes glowing faintly. "Papa," he said, voice low, almost mournful. He reached for me again, but this time, when his hand touched mine, it was warm, alive. I lifted him without thinking, cradling his frail body against my chest. He pressed his head against my shoulder, sighing softly. For the first time, I felt not terror, but pity. He was so small, so fragile, so desperately alone. When I woke, my arms still tingled with the memory of weight, and on the pillow beside me, where no child had ever lain, was a faint indentation. Claire kissed the spot, her voice trembling. "He's part of us now," she whispered. "Do you see? He chose us." I closed my eyes, because I did see, and that terrified me more than anything. Leaving Bangkok should have felt like relief. Airports are liminal spaces, I told myself. They cut one life from another, severing the strangeness of travel from the stability of home. I clung to that idea as we boarded the plane, convincing myself that with enough miles the boy would vanish like a bad dream. But the red cloth bundle sat nestled in Claire's arms, carried through security, cradled through takeoff, held against her chest as though it were flesh and bone. Each time I looked at it, the pit in my stomach deepened. On the flight, Claire whispered to him. Other passengers slept, headphones pressed to their ears, lost in their own worlds. But Claire sat rigid, lips brushing the fabric that wrapped the doll. Her voice was soft, soothing, as though she were coaxing a child through turbulence. Once I reached out, trying to take it from her, to stow it overhead where it belonged. She flinched violently, clutching the bundle tighter. "Don't," she hissed. "He doesn't like the dark." Her words struck me cold. "Claire, it's wood," I muttered. "It doesn't like or dislike anything." Her eyes snapped toward me, fierce and wild. "Don't talk that way in front of him. He can hear you." I sank back into my seat, silence pressing against me like another passenger. Hours passed. The plane's lights dimmed, the cabin filled with the rhythmic breathing of slumber. And then I heard it, the cry, faint, muffled, swallowed by the drone of the engines, but unmistakable. A baby's wail, rising and falling. I jolted upright, glancing around. No infants on the flight, no mothers pacing the aisle. Only Claire, cradling the doll, rocking gently as though soothing the sound no one else seemed to notice. I pressed my palms to my face. There was no leaving him behind. Not now, not ever. Back in Oregon, the house felt alien. We had been gone only 2 weeks, but stepping into our quiet suburban home was like returning to a stranger's life. The furniture sat untouched, the mail stacked neatly on the counter, the faint smell of pine cleaner lingering from the neighbor who had kindly checked in. It should have been comfort. But the moment Claire set the bundle down on the living room table, the air shifted, heavy, watching. That first night, the crying returned as though he had always lived here. The same thin wail, echoing through the hallways, threading under doors, slipping into every corner. I walked the house barefoot at 3 a.m., checking locks, staring into empty rooms, and everywhere I went, the sound followed. "Papa," it whispered once, from the dark of the nursery we had never furnished. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking. Claire thrived. That was the cruelest part. Her art began to sell again. Clients called, praising her new sketches, strange, haunting pieces that pulsed with raw life. She drew children, dozens of them, their eyes enormous, their hands outstretched. People claimed her work had never felt so alive. Money followed, commissions doubled. My own work picked up too. Contracts that had gone cold reignited. Opportunities fell into my lap with suspicious ease. Claire smiled at me across the dinner table, her eyes shining. "See," she whispered, "he's keeping his promise." I wanted to argue, to tell her this wasn't luck, it was a trap, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by the weight of undeniable fortune. Because she was right. Things were better, tangibly, impossibly better. And yet, each night, the crying persisted. Each morning, the walls bore new handprints, and each day the doll's eyes seemed a little brighter. One evening, I came home to find Claire sitting on the floor, the doll upright before her, a plate of sugared cakes between them. She was laughing softly as though at a joke I couldn't hear. "What are you doing?" I asked. Her smile faltered. "Playing." "With a doll?" She bristled. "With our son." My breath caught. "Don't call him that." Her eyes flashed. "Why not? He's done more for us than anyone else. He listens. He cares. Don't you feel it?" I shook my head, retreating into silence. Because the truth was, I did feel it. At night when the crying came, I felt the pull, the weight of loneliness, the desperate longing in his voice. Sometimes when exhaustion dragged me into dreams, I saw him standing closer, his hands brushing mine. his lips forming words I refused to hear. And worst of all, a part of me pitied him. The neighbors began to notice. One morning, Mrs. Green from across the street pulled me aside. "Daniel," she said, her brow furrowed, "is everything all right over there? I thought I heard a baby crying." My blood ran cold. She laughed awkwardly. "I must be mistaken, of course. You two don't have kids, but, well, it was so clear." I forced a smile, muttering something about the television, about Claire working late. But inside, panic gnawed. If others could hear him now, what did that mean? That night, the crying escalated. It wasn't a wail anymore. It was a scream, piercing, guttural, rattling the very walls. Claire held the doll tightly, rocking, tears streaming down her face. "He's upset," she cried. "You doubted him, Daniel. You made him angry." The house shook with the force of his fury. Handprints blossomed across every surface. Walls, windows, even the ceiling. Tiny smudges covered the refrigerator door, the mirrors, the bathroom tiles. I stumbled back, hands pressed to my ears, shouting, "What do you want from us?" And in the silence that followed, I heard it. Clear. Cold. "You." Good fortune is a dangerous thing. It never comes freely. It always waits, patient, with its hand outstretched. At first it was subtle. A new contract appeared in my inbox from a client I thought had forgotten me. Claire's art went viral online, commissions pouring in from strangers across the globe. Money filled our accounts faster than we could spend it. Neighbors commented on our luck, our glow. We smiled, nodded, played the part of a happy couple finally finding our stride. But inside our house, the truth gnawed at me like rats in the walls. Because each night the crying grew louder, and with each scream, more handprints bloomed across the house. I tried to ignore it. I drowned myself in work, in deadlines, in numbers that promised stability. Yet even in my office, I could feel him. One afternoon while reviewing contracts, I reached for a pen. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead, lying neatly in the center of the desk, was a small toy car. I froze. We had no children. We owned no toys. But there it sat, its red paint chipped, its wheels smeared faintly with gray. When I blinked, it was gone. Claire, on the other hand, embraced it. She spoke to him constantly, set places for him at the table, sang lullabies at night, her voice cracking with tenderness. Sometimes I caught her humming in the daylight, the doll cradled against her chest as she rocked in the old chair we'd bought for someday. Someday that was never meant to come. "He's given us everything," she told me one evening, her eyes bright with feverish conviction. "Why can't you love him the way I do?" My mouth opened, closed. How could I explain that what she called love felt to me like a leash tightening around our throats? Then came the first price. It was a Tuesday when I woke to find my hands smeared with gray dust. My nails, my palms, even the creases of my skin, coated. I scrubbed until they bled, but the faint residue lingered, clinging like ash. That same day, Claire collapsed in the kitchen. She said she was fine, just dizzy, but her skin looked pale, almost translucent, veins faintly visible beneath the surface, just like the boys in my dreams. I begged her to see a doctor. She refused. "It's nothing," she whispered. "He's just taking what he needs." Her words chilled me more than her condition. The second price was sleep. The crying no longer came only at night. It threaded through the days now, faint but constant, like a radio playing in another room. I'd hear it while driving, while showering, while speaking on the phone. "Papa," it would murmur, "don't leave me." I stopped sleeping entirely. Coffee and pills kept me upright, but my body began to betray me. My hands shook, my vision blurred, and still when I closed my eyes, even for seconds, I felt the weight of him climbing onto my chest, pressing tiny hands against my throat. The third price was isolation. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors crossed the street rather than wave. Even my own family grew distant. "Daniel," my sister said over the phone, "is everything okay? You sound different." I opened my mouth to answer, but a faint giggle echoed through the line, high and childish. She gasped. "What was that? Was that—" The call dropped. She didn't phone again. By then, the house was no longer ours. Handprints covered every wall, layered upon each other like graffiti from another world. They smudged mirrors, crawled across windows, stained even the ceiling. No amount of scrubbing removed them. Paint only seemed to feed them, new prints blooming over fresh coats within hours. At night, shadows flitted through the hallways. Sometimes I caught a glimpse, a pale arm vanishing behind a door, a pair of black eyes watching from the stairs, and always the crying, louder, closer, demanding. One night, I snapped. The crying had gone on for hours, unrelenting, a shriek that clawed at the inside of my skull. I stumbled into the living room, the doll sitting calmly on the table, Claire asleep in the chair beside it. "You want food?" I shouted. "You want love? You want everything from us? Then take me. Leave her alone." The crying stopped. Silence swallowed the house. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over. Relief surged, hot and dizzying. Then slowly, new handprints began to appear. Not on the walls this time. On me. I looked down to see tiny gray smudges blooming across my arms, my chest, my throat, prints pressing from the inside out. I screamed, clawing at my skin, but the marks spread, covering me in invisible hands. And from the darkness, his voice came clear as glass. "You are mine, Papa." I collapsed. When I woke, dawn spilled weakly through the windows. The prints on my skin were gone, but the memory of their grip lingered, phantom bruises burning beneath the surface. Claire knelt beside me, her face serene. "He's claimed you," she whispered. "Now you'll never leave us." Her words should have broken me. Instead, they settled with dreadful certainty, because I already knew. There is a kind of terror worse than noise. It's the silence that follows, the pause that makes you realize something is watching. For weeks, the crying had been constant, an endless thread weaving through every hour. But then one night, it stopped. The silence was so thick it woke me, pulling me upright in bed. Claire slept soundly, the doll nestled against her chest. The house lay in stillness, the kind that feels unnatural, the kind that prickles your skin because you know it won't last. And that was when I saw him. At first, it was only movement, quick, darting at the edge of vision. A shadow slipping from the hallway into the kitchen. I froze, every muscle taut. Then came the sound, small, quick footsteps padding across the wooden floor. Not heavy like an adult's, light, childlike. "Claire," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. She stirred, eyes unfocused. "What is it?" I pointed toward the doorway. My voice cracked. "He's here." Her face softened into a strange smile. "Good," she murmured and rolled back into sleep. I couldn't sleep again. I sat in the corner chair, staring into the dark, every nerve screaming. Hours crawled by. At one point, I swore I saw a pale arm slip behind the couch. Another time, the bathroom door creaked open, though no one was inside. And then, just before dawn, I caught him. In the hallway mirror, faint but undeniable, the reflection of a boy. He stood barefoot on the carpet, eyes wide, mouth trembling as though about to cry. His small hands pressed against the glass, smearing gray prints across the surface. When I spun around, the hallway was empty, but the mirror remained smudged. From that night on, he made himself known. Sometimes I'd catch him darting past doorways, a flash of pale skin and dark hair. Other times, I'd hear the creak of stairs under a weight too small to belong to Claire or me. Once, while shaving, I glanced into the bathroom mirror and saw him crouched in the corner, staring at me with eyes like wet coal. When I turned, the corner was empty, but the faint sound of giggling lingered, high and thin. I began to dread mirrors, reflections, glass. They caught him even when the naked eye did not. Claire, however, welcomed him. I would find her kneeling in the living room, arms outstretched as though to embrace someone I couldn't see. Sometimes she'd laugh softly, brushing her hair back as though tiny fingers had tugged at it. "He's learning to show himself," she told me one evening, her voice bright with pride. "He trusts us now." "Us?" I asked bitterly. "Or just you?" She didn't answer. The divide between us deepened. Meals went untouched by me but set aside for him. Conversations dwindled into one-sided exchanges, Claire whispering to corners, pausing as though listening to replies only she could hear. I tried to pull her back. I begged her to stop, but the more I fought, the more she slipped away. "You don't understand," she told me one night, her eyes fever bright. "We were chosen. He needed us, and I need him." Her hand brushed the doll's wooden cheek with the tenderness of a mother. "He's our son now, Daniel." I began to lose time. Once I found myself standing in the nursery, an empty room we'd always avoided, holding a toy I didn't remember buying. A stuffed rabbit, its fur old and worn, its eyes button black. I dropped it in horror, but the next morning it sat neatly on the shelf, as though placed there by careful hands. Another time I woke on the couch with gray smudges across my shirt, small handprints pressed into the fabric. Each time Claire's gaze grew softer, more pitying. "He's choosing you," she whispered. "Soon you'll understand." The neighbors whispered too. Mrs. Green stopped me at the mailbox, her face pale. "Daniel," she said nervously, I thought I saw a boy in your window, late at night. Do you have family visiting?" My heart thudded. "No," I said too quickly. Her eyes lingered on me, troubled. "Strange. He looked sad." She hurried away before I could reply. That night I found fresh prints on the inside of the window she'd mentioned. Small palms pressed against the glass, as though someone had been watching her from the other side. The worst came one evening while I sat in the living room, head in my hands, trying to remember who I had been before this. The TV flickered with static. The lights dimmed, then flared. And in the corner I saw him, not a shadow, not a reflection, him. He stood there barefoot, his head tilted. His skin was pale, veins visible like blue rivers beneath the surface. His eyes were enormous, dark, glistening. "Papa," he whispered. The sound wasn't distant this time. It was in the room, vibrating the air. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. "Stay away," I gasped. His lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. "Don't leave me, Papa. I'm yours." And then he was gone. The room fell silent. Only the doll remained, sitting motionless on the table. But when I dared to look closer, I swore its glass eyes gleamed wetly, as though from tears. That night Claire held me as I shook. For the first time in months, she sounded almost like herself. "Don't fight him," she whispered. "It only hurts more. Just love him. That's all he wants." But I couldn't, because love given to the dead is not love at all. It's surrender. And I knew if I surrendered, I'd never come back. The night began like any other. If such words still meant anything in a house no longer ours. The air was heavy, pressing, each breath thick with the sour, sweet stench of spoiled milk. Handprints stained every wall, layered until they formed a grotesque wallpaper of tiny palms. The doll sat in the center of the living room, offerings piled around him like a feast for the dead. Claire rocked gently in the old chair. The doll clutched against her chest, humming the same lullaby night after night. I sat across from her, hollow-eyed, listening to the silence that had settled like a storm waiting to break. And then, it broke. The crying began softly as it always did. A whimper, a sob. But it grew quickly, swelling into a wail so sharp the windows rattled in their frames. The floorboards quivered beneath my feet. The lights flickered. The air itself seemed to pulse with sound. Claire's eyes lit with joy. "He's here," she whispered, kissing the doll's forehead. "He's finally here." The crying rose, multiplied. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was dozens, hundreds. A chorus of unseen children shrieking in unison, their grief rattling the walls, their hunger tearing through the night. Handprints exploded across the ceiling, the floor, the furniture. Fresh, wet, smudged like ash. They crawled up my arms, pressed against my chest, clawed at my throat. I fell to my knees, choking. "Claire!" I screamed. "Make it stop!" But she only rocked faster, her smile rapturous, her voice breaking as she sang, "Hush, little one. Mama's here. Don't cry. Don't cry." The air darkened. Shadows coiled, thick and writhing, filling every corner. And then he stepped out. Not the doll, not the whispers. Him, the boy. Small, frail, skin translucent, veins like ink beneath paper. His eyes glistened black, too large for his face. He walked barefoot across the carpet, leaving wet gray prints that smoldered as though burned into the fibers. He stopped before me. "Papa," he said, his voice echoing like a hollow drum. I tried to move, but my body locked. My throat burned with unshed screams. He reached out, tiny fingers brushing my cheek. They were cold, so cold I felt frost crawl beneath my skin. "Don't leave me, Papa. Stay." Behind him, the shadows writhed, forming shapes of other children, limbs and faces half seen, dozens of them pressing against the walls, their cries merging into one endless scream. Claire stood suddenly, clutching the doll tighter. Her voice was ecstatic, trembling with devotion. "He's chosen us, Daniel. Don't you see? He's given us everything. All we have to do is love him." Her eyes shone with tears. "He's our son now." I staggered back, shaking my head. "He's not ours. He's not." The boy's face crumpled. His lips trembled, tears spilling down. "You don't love me," he whispered. The chorus swelled, deafening, rattling the very bones of the house. The handprints pressed harder, the walls bulging inward as if the children behind them were trying to break through. Claire fell to her knees, clutching the doll, wailing, "No! He loves you! He does! Please! Don't cry! Don't cry!" But the boy turned to me, his eyes endless black, and I knew the truth. He wanted me. Something inside me snapped. I lunged for the doll, ripping it from Claire's arms. She screamed, clawing at me, her nails raking my skin. "Don't hurt him!" she shrieked. I staggered back, holding the doll high. Its glass eyes glimmered wetly. Its painted smile stretched wide. The crying shook the house, louder, louder, until my skull felt ready to split. "Stop!" I roared. "Stop this!" And for a single shattering moment, the house fell silent. The boy stared at me, his eyes narrowing. "If you break him," he whispered, "I'll stay forever." My hands shook. My breath tore in ragged gasps. Claire's voice rose behind me, raw with desperation. "Don't, Daniel. Please, don't." The silence pressed in, heavier than any scream. The doll's weight was cold, pulsing, almost alive. And in that moment, I realized there was no winning, no escape, because love given to the dead is a leash, and rejection is a curse. I don't remember what happened next. The night fractured into shards of memory, Claire's sobs, the sound of glass breaking, the walls shuddering as though the house itself wept. Tiny hands clawing at my skin, a voice screaming in my ear. "Papa, Papa, Papa," until the word lost all meaning. And then, darkness. I'm writing this now in the quiet after. The house is still. Claire hasn't spoken for days. She sits in the corner, rocking the doll, humming her lullaby in a voice gone hoarse. Sometimes I hear him too, not crying now, laughing, playing, running through the halls where no child should be. The neighbors don't visit anymore. My family won't answer calls. And in the night, when the silence deepens, I see him standing at the foot of our bed. His eyes glisten, his lips curve, his voice is soft. "Papa," he says, "you're mine." And I don't know anymore if he's wrong. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.